Hello, everyone. I'm joining you from Paris. I'm pleased to welcome you to what promises to be a fascinating conversation inspired by the collection of Ezra and Cecile Zilkha in New York, whose doors we are about to open. It includes a distinguished group of works by Louis XIV's esteemed court cabinet maker, Andre-Charles Boulle. To discuss this, I'm joined tonight and today by a truly international team: Tino Zervudachi, worldwide acclaimed interior designer; Tobias Meyer, art advisor in 20th century paintings and sculpture; Yannick Chastang, conservator and restoration expert of French and continental furniture; and our moderator, Mitch Owens, decorative art editor of Architectural Digest. We thank him for featuring the sale in the latest issue. Thank you, Mitch. Special thank you to Sotheby's International Realty for being our presenting partner. A reminder that the collection of Ezra and Cecile Zilkha will be sold in New York on the 20th of November. Additional highlights will feature in magnificent jewels on 9th of December and American art on 11th of December. For more information, please visit sotheby's.com/Zilkha. If you are in New York, remember our preview exhibition is open by appointment only through 19th of November at 5 p.m. We look forward, of course, to seeing you in the gallery. Today, our discussions will last approximately 45 minutes, at which point we will be answering some of your questions, which you can submit at any time, starting now. Underneath your video screen, you will see a web form where you can enter your name and question in the respective boxes and click Submit. We look forward to engaging with your questions and comments a little later. From here, I would like to hand it over to Mitch Owens, who will tell us a bit about the Zilkhas and their extraordinary apartment and way of life. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Mario. Those fortunate enough to have visited the late Ezra and Cecile Zilkha's home on Fifth Avenue in New York found themselves journeying back through the centuries, and specifically to the style and opulence of the 18th century Parisian Hôtel Particulier. Descended from a prominent Babylonian Jewish family, Ezra Zilkha had a deep respect for the past. "I'm always conscious of history," he once said in an interview. And nowhere was this more important and more apparent than in the works of European art and design that filled their apartment. Spanning more than 300 years, the Zilkha collection embodied their assured and singular taste down to the finest details. Juxtapositions abound. Richly decorated French Golden Age tables by Andre-Charles Boulle exist beside delicate sculptural figures by Degas. An exotic old master portrait by Jean-Baptiste Lepont accompanies a pared-back modernist composition by Milton Avery. And provenance runs deep. Furniture includes Voyeuse from the House of Savoy, a table that once belonged to Marie Antoinette, and a commode formerly with the Habsburgs. Mario, let's start out by talking about the Zilkha's collecting style. How would you describe it, particularly upon your first visit to that amazing apartment on Fifth Avenue?
Thank you, Mitch. I have to say that when I entered the beautiful apartment on the Fifth Avenue, it had, of course, for me, the wow effect. I always heard of the Zilkha collection, but I was never able to visit it. So 12 months ago, it was really the first time for me. And I clearly remember that when I opened the doors of the Grand Salon, some of the Mrs. Reisman's period rooms at the Metropolitan Museum came to my mind. This mix of lacquer furniture, lavish bronzes, porcelain mounted objects, great gildwood seat furniture. It was an immediate parallel for me. I would say that, and I never had the privilege of meeting them, although I had the privilege of meeting the children. Mr. and Mrs. Zilkha were surely discerning and voracious collectors in almost all domains. Although, of course, they had a preference for the so-called old Louis styles, Louis XIV, 15, and 16. Peter Wilson would have said the black, the curve, and the straight. I would say that they had definitely a soft spot for Boulle furniture, and this webinar is in particular about Boulle furniture. But before we go into the Boulle furniture, I really would like to mention some of the highlights of their collection, because they talk a lot of their style and how they mix styles really and categories. I love, for example, in this slide, the Degas bronzes on the Louis XVI Sac Station Percier Fontaine commode. Or in another room, I found a Rodin on a lavish weekends Louis XV commodes on Japanese lacquers, or the entrance gallery. The entrance gallery, it was really a revelation when you had the most amazing sculptures by Cordier, the orange cellars, 19th century, next to the most extraordinary jardiniere, which, funnily enough, they are not inlaid, but they are applied with gilt bronzes. But this contrast reminds me of Boulle. Of course, it's not Boulle because it's Empire, but it has that sort of visual effect. Of course, the house is complemented also with a beautiful collection of mice and birds that at that time it was, I suppose, it was a must for any chic house of that period in the 70s and in the 80s. And if I have to mention, apart from furniture, if I have to mention my favorite work of art in the cell, apart from Boulle, it would be the painting by Le Prince of a lady in a Turkish, almost a Turkish robe, dress, on the most lavish Louis XVI Giltwood Ottoman or sofa. So that to me is definitely my favorite lot in the cell. And here we go. I gave you an overview of what I thought of the collection.
So, Mario, since we're all talking about Boulle, and we're talking about Boulle largely as a surname, who was Boulle? Why? What made him so impactful and so desired by collectors?
Thank you. Well, of course, a webinar of 45 minutes is not enough to tell the story of Andre-Charles Boulle. I would like maybe to give you some bullet points, also because in our audience, I hope that there will be some beginners, some novices who will be fascinated to hear about Andre-Charles Boulle. Andre-Charles Boulle, for sure, he was the greatest cabinet maker, ebonist ever of all times. And nobody can risk to be contradicted on this point. He had a very long career. He died in 1732 and he was 90 years old. And even if at a certain time he handed over the workshop to his children, in fact, he was always involved. He was an enfant prodige. So he showed really his genius from an early age. He was, I would say, he was one of the greatest artists in any medium that France has ever produced, because he was not only a cabinet maker, but he was also a sculptor, a bronze maker. He was able to cast his own bronzes. And of course, he gave the name to the famous Boulle technique. And for this, we have Yannick, who will cast some light on the Boulle technique. His life ran in parallel to the life of his biggest patron, Louis XIV. He's an inventor of a new type of functional furniture, the bureau plat, the commode, which didn't exist before. I would like to give you, and I'm nearly there, some bullet points which can be fun. He was the only cabinet maker to be called by his name in 18th century catalogs. He was a friend of the biggest Baroque sculptor Bernini, and this, I would say, is pretty telling of his grandeur and of his status. He was eternally indebted. because he was an avid collector and he never missed an auction. He would have never surely missed the Zilkha auction if he was still alive today. And finally, I would say that he was always admired in the 17th century, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, even today. And an anecdote is that during the revolution, even the authorities, they were selling up furniture from all other cabinet makers, but they were clever enough to preserve the Boulle pieces for the state collections. In the Zilkha sale, we are in fact fortunate enough, lucky enough not to have not one, not two, but in fact 3 masterpieces by Andre-Charles Boulle. And I would like to start really to give a couple of lines on these beautiful and extremely rare of table and houche. Houche translates in English in bread bin because they have a lateral drawer. They are in the première technique partie, that means brass inlay on tortoiseshell ground, and these pair of tables were in my days at Sotheby's, I never saw them before. They are circa 1700, and it's typical of the transformation that Andre-Charles Boulle was able to process even starting from other pieces of furniture. And now we have a slide, of course, of the highlight of the Boulle selection is a phenomenally important and beautiful bureau plat, circa 1715, and deuxième partie, which means we have a predominance of brass, and you see the tortoiseshell a bit less. It has, like many other pieces in the Zilkha collection, it has a staggering provenance because it was in the collection of Machaut d'Arnouville, who was a statesman. He was the owner of one of the best 18th century collections in the 18th century, and he was also in control of Louis XIV's finances. So he was a pretty rich man. And then lately, he was also in the collection of Ortiz Patiño. Similar examples are in the best museums or country houses of the world, the Getty, the Wallace, the Frick, Windsor, Chatsworth, you name it. And then finally, we have another very important piece by Boulle, which is this pair of consoles, where you can really see, I hope that you can see in the slide, really the difference between the two techniques, première partie and deuxième partie. Here, Boulle shows his genius producing consoles with 6 legs, and Yannick will comment on this later. They also have a staggering provenance because they come from the Elie de Rothschild collection, and then they were resold in the OJ sale. So these are the 3 highlights, and I hope that these 3 highlights really will trigger questions from you, from our speakers today.
Tobias, I know that you've always been a great fan of Boulle, and which leads me to wonder, we're talking about a cabinet maker of extreme importance, but from the 17th and early 18th centuries, what makes him still so relevant today in a way that, say, some of his contemporaries aren't?
I think that, you remain relevant if you're an innovator. That's the relevance that Boulle has, as every other genius in a way. And the relevance is really that he reinvented everything when it comes to furniture and when it comes to furniture shapes. And people today, or the people that I help to collect, are very comfortable, exposing themselves to genius, whether it's Basquiat or Rothko or whether it's Boulle. But it just has to have integrity, and it has to have artistic genius. And Boulle presents that to you. He's not somebody who might modify an already generic shape, but he's invented it. And that to me is incredibly relevant and very interesting. And I think will be of more interest to collectors as they move to areas where they can find genius.
And I know that seeing Boulle over the years, we've seen it, very much embraced in the 20th century by collectors who actually have a very modern sensibility, who perhaps you wouldn't necessarily imagine would own.
Yes, and that's sort of almost heroes of collecting if you think in the 20th century. I think that when you think about Léon Lambert, the penthouse in Brussels, with these incredible Giacometti sculptures. I think we have a slide of that, where you can actually talk about the combination of great 20th century art. Here it is.
Now this is the Lamberts in Brussels.
Yes, that is Lambert in Brussels, interior designed by Ward Bennett. Ward Bennett, who was, very important actually in the sort of association of 18th century furniture and 20th century art. He did the Agnelli penthouse in Rome, and he did this. And actually, interesting enough, we'll talk about the later Givenchy, when he went to see the Ward Bennett apartment by Agnelli, then decided to live with Boulle and Rothko himself. So there's a sort of history around 1965, 70 of these great interiors with these great combinations of early 18th century furniture and great 20th century art.
And I believe we have a slide of that coming up next.
Yes, let's have a look. Let's see where we can bring that up.
No.
But you were saying about Givenchy, his famous apartment in Paris.
Yeah.
With all of that sort of Charles Sévigny furniture, very modern, very stainless steel, very, very hard edged, and then this technologically voluptuous wood.
Yes, and they live very happily together. That's the interesting part.
Now, now here we have two rather extraordinary Boulle pieces, and I know that Yannick, you might like to talk about the innovation here, because we're looking at a piece of furniture on the left that had never been seen before.
Yes, thank you, Mitch. I think Meyer was very correct in describing Boulle as one of these kind of superhuman, being able to draw, being able to paint, but also, of course, being a very great cabinet maker. And I think 200-300 years later, we tend to forget how much Boulle innovated at the time. I think nowadays we regard this object maybe as old-fashioned, but if you think at the time, some of the objects produced by Boulle or his workshop were absolutely extraordinary, something that you've never seen before. One example that I wanted to show you is here with the what we call today the chest of drawers, which in French is called the commode. And they are evident that maybe Boulle is behind the design of the commode, of the modern day commode. But what you see on the left is what he does of that commode, what he creates of that chest of drawers. And if you compare with a more pedestrian, without being that rude, but a more pedestrian piece of furniture made exactly at the same time, but not by Boulle, but by Nicolas Sajot on the right, on the right, yes. It's a very boxy object. It's like a box with four legs and drawers. And I think that's where Boulle is so amazing. It does change the shape. It does turn a simple boxed pieces of furniture into a sculpture. It's a really impressive way of using three-dimensional elements such as brand and marquetry. So I think that's what we need to keep in mind, that innovation in form, in design, in shapes.
I know that to go back to something briefly that Tino said, but Tobias said, that is still very much hinged on your comments, is this idea that we, meaning people living in the world, we've lived with commodes, we've lived with desks, bureau plat, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And to think that at a moment in time, that was a completely revolutionary, earth-shattering shape.
Tobias?
No, I think I agree. That's exactly the innovation that we're talking about. That's like a great Bugatti car. You know, you've never seen anything like that before. The shape, the lines, the aesthetics, the idea of also technology to actually make your life as difficult as possible as a furniture maker by using, you know, materials that are very hard to handle and really demand a sculptural approach and a technological approach that is beyond anything we've seen before. So it's inventing on every level.
And building a piece of furniture on a curve is obviously, you don't need to be a practical person to realize that it is going to be a challenge that no other person wants to take on. So when you look at an object, when you think about gluing brass and tortoiseshell and marquetry on a curve, and then embellish it with gilt bronze that fits absolutely perfectly to the shape, it's an amazing achievement that really nowadays very few people are able to match.
I wonder if we still have some of those images from the slide that Tobias was talking about showing the Boulle in contemporary spaces. Here we go.
Yes, so this is actually my husband and my apartment that we did with Jacques Ange 4 years ago. And that several things that could be of interest, but mostly the very Boulle thing that we have is on the left, the Bureau Plat in front of the library, which actually is a very well documented piece by Boulle he made for the Chateau de Bercy, which subsequently was torn down. And the fact that it was torn down started the Monument Historique in France. And it's actually one of two from the same owner collector. He had a very elaborate, I think, Yannick, is it contrepartie or première partie, the second Bercy Bureau Plat?
I think it's première partie, I can't remember.
Okay, so there's a première, very elaborate Bureau Plat, and then there's the second Bureau Plat, which he had, more for the country, which is documented, and we actually found the room that it was in Bercy. The paneling of that room that was subsequently torn down was bought by Sir Richard Wallace and ended up in England in a house where Empress Eugenie ended up living. So we know exactly what it looked like, what the paneling looked like. It was oak paneling, very beautiful designs after Pinot. So anyway, so that this object came up at auction, we were able to buy it. And again, when you look at it, when you look at the lines, which here you can't, but the legs, as they are veneered, always remind me of a beautifully designed car. On the right is the living room with some Warhol and Richard Prince paintings. And we actually built the wall that the lacquer cabinet you can see in the background for this cabinet. It's one of two. It's a pair, which also interesting provenance. They first were sold by an auction house at the end of the 19th century from a country house. Then they went to Madame Andre-Charles, who had a very good collection of furniture, which was sold in the 20s in Paris, and then bought by Espirito Santo, who was a great collector who owned also the double Bureau Plat. I think that's now at the Getty. And then they were bought by Aveline, Jean-Marie Rossi, and sold to the March family, and the March family sold them at auction. And we bought them, and we literally built the walls for them. They are Chinese lacquer and gilt bronze mounts. You can't really see it, but you see how happily all of this lives in a very contemporary interior. The apartment itself, and you can't see it, but also has some travertine doors, and that's again a reference to Ward Bennett's apartment in Agnelli, because I was lucky enough, Mario, I don't know whether you know this, but our dear friend and colleague of my former colleague, Claudia Dweck, took me for tea to the Agnellis. And when Gianni Agnelli took us around the apartment with his travertine doors and all this sort of exquisite work brought together, and he entertained us. And what I don't forget about it is that when he showed us his bedroom, and he showed us the small window he made over the bedroom, and it had a view of St. Peter. He said, well, you know, I always enjoyed the fact that I was higher than the building. Which was wonderful. Also a photograph of the Agnelli interior that we could show or the Sévigné interior after this, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes,
I would like to come back to you on one point, Tobias. When you were talking of the Bercy Bureau Plat, going back to our Bureau Plat, in fact, our Bureau Plat comes, as I said, from Machaut d'Arnouville, and he had the deuxième partie for the country house, and he had the première partie for the house in Paris. So in fact, he had the two Bureau Plat, almost identical. And I come back to your point on the Bercy Bureau Plat.
Yeah, it's very interesting that they didn't want to be without one.
Exactly.
So, Tobias, when was your first encounter with Boulle?
My father sent me to England when I was 13 to speak English, and I ended up, and you will enjoy this, in a house designed by Decimus Burton. Who, yes, in a house, a neo-Gothic house in St. Leonard's-on-Sea, which was built in a sort of subscription garden of the early 19th century. And it was incredible. And the owner of this house was no other than the mother of this actress, Kelly LeBrock, who did Weird Science. Do you remember this film? She was a sort of very beautiful actress married to Steven Seagal.
The lady in red.
Yes, that's her. Yeah. So Kelly's mother owned this house. And Kelly's mother was like my Auntie May. You know, she said, okay, Tobias, you can do all these things. And she took me to the Wallace collection when I was 13. And I saw all these things. And I said, oh my God, what is this? And I just never stopped looking and loving furniture, particularly Boulle then. And I remember also one day, and Yannick, I don't know whether you're much younger than I am, but you remember that before Aveline moved to the Place Beauvau for a moment, they were on the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, they were on the side, there was a sort of, it was much more remote. And I remember peering as an 18-year-old when I went to Paris into the windows, I didn't dare to go inside, into the Aveline shop, and there was a Boulle Bureau Plat, and I think it was the Givenchy Bureau Plat. I think so. It could have been there, yes, because, you know, he had the most unbelievable things. And so the trigger when I was 13, 14 sort of never let up because it was always so interesting. And I just liked the confidence of it. You know,
speaking of confidence, I'm glad you said that, because this photograph that you brought into this discussion, this incredibly bold painting with this incredibly confident Tablanouche.
Yes, they live very happily together, and see whether we can find the Givenchy photograph that should be there too, the Sévigné interior, if that is somewhere, and we can show it, because it also shows that these shapes live very happily with contemporary art or 20th century art, that to speak, because they.
But I'm glad that you pointed that out about the level of the power.
Yes, that's Walt Bennett. Yes, absolutely. And you see this sort of, what's interesting here, this is Agnelli with the Modigliani and the Brancusi under the Modigliani, but you also see this beautiful early 18th century English silver flasks that, again, because of the quality that they actually are and this design they manifest, live very happily in this extraordinary penthouse. Mm. Let's see whether we have one more slide of the Rothko, which I want to show. But anyway, it's sort of it's you know, he's the one. If you want to collect one furniture designer, actually forget about all the others through the 20th century. Collect him, and you know, you need good expertise. That's why I think it's important that Yannick is here, because Yannick has taken on many of these things under very close inspection, has also devised new ways of examining them, which he will talk about. You know, that there are new technologies that tells you whether certain mounts are right or wrong. Because the reason why, I mean, Boulle was loved so much all the time, that things, you know, were appreciated. Appreciated means also they sometimes got repaired, even already in the 18th century. So these things have a life. And that's part of it. But you need to just be careful. You need to understand it in a way like a car. You know, a car gets repaired as well. But you want to make sure that the carcass and the design is correct, and then you can go. And I also felt, talking a little bit about price, that, there's no reason why a great bureau plat by Boulle of that provenance that you have for sale isn't the same price as a great vintage car, which today is around $10-12 million. It should be that, compared to the historical relevance, plus the artistic and aesthetic, exceptionality that's manifested in it.
So Yannick, can you tell us a little bit about the Boulle technique in terms of the inlay, which you've already mentioned? I think we may have the slide that comes next after this.
Yes, well, the Boulle technique, as you know, Boulle furniture are named after Boulle, so obviously the relationship is very strong, and still nowadays. The English even use the word Boulle or the name Boulle with a slightly different spelling, but the name Boulle survived 300 years, almost unforgotten for 300 years. So where Boulle is extraordinary, unique, is that combining tortoiseshell marquetry. So marquetry is a thin veneer decoration that is glued onto a fairly common solid wood carcass. So you have as you can see from that desk, the solid wood carcass of that desk is made of oak, plain, simple European oak. And it is veneered with the most elaborate and the most precious material, tortoiseshell and brass. And of course, it's decorated with the gilt bronze, which Boulle made himself extremely famous for. Boulle was not only a maker of furniture, he was also a maker of chandelier, of wall lights, and some very, very elaborate objects in bronze that were never been made before. I think the other thing that maybe we need to keep in mind, it's the level of gloss and the level of preciosity of the material. I think today everything is very glossy in our life. We are very lucky to have glossy material in our phone, in our TV, in everywhere. But tortoiseshell in the 17th century must have been an incredible material for anyone to experience. There was nothing comparable available in Europe, this glossy, reflective material. And that must have been extremely valuable and very valued by the people who commissioned this object.
Now I believe our next slide, Tino, is addressed to you, if I'm not mistaken. And it's really about using pieces like this in still a contemporary fashion within your interiors. What does Boulle add to when you're composing a room?
Well, the great thing about Boulle furniture is it's so imaginative, quite apart from the quality of it and the sort of bravery of it, the sort of flourish of a Boulle piece of furniture and a contemporary makes something exciting happen. The conversation, let's say, between a modern table or a modern sofa and something as exceptional as a Boulle bureau plat, like the one in this photo, or the cabinets between the windows on the other side of the room, just bring something to the room that, apart from its historical interest and its incredible quality, brings something to them that has a sort of magic to it.
And now we've seen over the years the great interest within collectors, mixing the old and the new, the Boulle with the Rothko, etc. Are clients still today as passionate about mixing with almost like a high wire act of periods and styles and materials amid Boulle?
I would say that people who are really interested in interiors and have some wonderful things, most people would perhaps have inherited a Boulle desk or a Boulle cabinet from a parent or grandparent or somewhere from the family, and they don't want to let go of it because it's the sort of the best thing the family has owned. And so if someone who's interested in interiors wants to just create an incredible interior with all the best that they can afford of their time, so not losing the history of the transmission of wonderful things. So yes, bringing in a very contemporary dining table or chairs or contemporary art in with the Boulle, you're pushing the limits and you're pushing yourself into the 21st century, enjoying the past and embracing the future.
And I believe our next slide carries on with some more of that philosophy of mixing.
I've ended up in situations where people have said, do you really need to bring the old furniture in? And perhaps we should try and find something new for the room rather than bring Granny's old chest of drawers, even though it's a Boulle one. And actually, I find that they feel they need to be encouraged to keep their old things, because very often they feel it's old-fashioned. But you can see that you can easily enjoy a contemporary feeling room with old things in it. And it's the quality of the things that you put together that makes the environment harmonious.
I have to say that that's one of my favorite things I've seen. That room with the bacon.
Oh, good.
Oh my God.
It looks good.
But again, it's that as Tobias said, it's that, you know, what would have been, I'm just curious, what would have been hanging above a Boulle commode in, say, 1700 versus what would it be hanging above it today? Were they still equally strong, bold pieces of art?
I mean, Yannick can answer this, and also Mario, this sort of idea of the interior then is so different. You know, I think maybe because these interiors didn't have, painting wasn't as significant, the separation between these things was not as it is now. So you probably had a pilaster over it, because architecture was such an overriding factor even within the design of the furniture. So, you know, that's sort of probably what was there.
And the piece of furniture by Boulle had the same importance of a very important painting or of a bronze. So they were really considered at the same level. And many sitters in the paintings. I have the paintings behind me with the sitter who very proudly shows his bureau, his Boulle bureau plat. If you can see, it has the same mask of Heraclitus or Democritus. Now I cannot turn to look at it, but it was really a matter of pride to own a piece of that standard, and
status symbol.
And it is indeed a symbol of status. I mean, it's not only a piece of decorative art. It's not a piece of furniture. It's actually a lot more than that. It is used as a decorative item, and it's elaborate on so many levels. It reflects onto the victory of war that you just done earlier. It reflects on who you're trying to emulate in terms of Roman gods or whatever. But also in terms of technology, if you had a piece of Boulle in your house, you were at the top of modern technology. It was your iPhone 12. It wasn't the old one. It was actually the new one. And I think that's important. It's not only decorative art. It's actually very, very, it's at the same level of fine art.
Well, I think we need to wrap up our discussion, but what I'd like for us all to do for a moment is to consider, why are we still so fascinated by Boulle's genius? And I'm going to start with Tino.
Fascinated by the quality of it, by the sort of ingeniousness of it, and when you look at it or analyze a bit of Boulle furniture, you open the drawers or open the doors, the ingeniousness, you kind of wonder, how could anyone have possibly thought how to make this and achieve it? It's sort of magic. It's like has a sort of magic quality, and I think that's what I find incredibly engaging about it. Apart from the magic of tortoise shell or how on earth one is able to incise metal into such incredibly refined detail, it just sort of has a very magical feel.
Tobias?
Like I said, I like the confidence. I like the fact that this guy knew what he was doing. It's like when a painter is really at his peak. You know, when you feel it, it's inherent to the object. It radiates this confidence. When you walk into a room and there's a great Picasso on the wall, and you know that Picasso this is 1932, he knows what he's doing. He's completely in it and in the medium and in the moment. And I think that that's so convincing for me about a great piece of Boulle furniture, that he's completely in control and in mastership of what it is. And he's not afraid. And that I love.
Mario?
What fascinates me of Boulle is that he was always collected. There was always a good reason to collect Boulle in his lifetime, because he was, of course, Louis XIV and the court were his best client. Then when these people start to die, these pieces of furniture come back on the market and they find new buyers. Then they are reinvented at the end of the 18th century by cabinet maker like Joseph or Levasseur, who use pieces by Boulle, or they reinvent pieces by Boulle. During the revolution, these pieces are preserved by the state, and then the less other pieces of Boulle, of course, they left the country and they start to be collected by the English aristocrats. So that's why today we have so much Boulle in English country houses, luckily. And then after the English country houses, there were the American collectors. So he's a cabinet maker, he's a genius who never went out of fashion. And then, of course, then we mentioned Morgan, Frick, and all the big American collectors, and still today, despite the fact that, of course, Tobias, I wish that a bureau plat of Boulle was worth as Richter, but he still commands high prices, all done. Yeah. Now it's up to Yannick to respond, to reply to your question.
You get the last word of why we're still fascinated.
I'm not sure I want to. Well, to me, Boulle, I've got a different story maybe from all of you, because I'm a craftsman, and I trained at École Boulle in Paris. At 15 years old, I was already at École Boulle in Paris, so the name Boulle was just always there as a teenager. And you know, when you're a craftsman and you go to the Louvre and you go to auction house and you see some masterpiece by Boulle, you just dream, you envy, you're jealous almost. Then you're not able to reach that quality yet. And for me, it's a kind of journey. And looking at Boulle is the end destination. To be able to do what he was able to do is something that I hope one day I'll reach, but I know perfectly I will never. I'm not this great painter. I'm not this great carver, and so I regard Boulle with envy. I think that's what I do. That's what I do every day when I restore one.
Now we have questions from the audience, and question one, who would like to take this? It's what are the values and price trends of Boulle since the days of Louis XIV?
Wow. Well, I can just mention, Yannick, please. Do.
Well, the value obviously goes up and down for any art. I would say that in the middle of the war, it's not something that people spend money on. But generally speaking, Boulle furniture retain their value very well, and they do increase in value. They were always collected and always desirable, and it has retained very good value. And not to say that they've increased.
I can give you a recent example. We had in Paris from a very distinguished collection a commode with rounded corners, and from an estimate of 400,000 euros, it made 800,000 euros. 3 years before, the Comte party of the same model made 900,000 euros, 1 million. So still today commands great prices. Of course, one should look through the auction catalogs from the 18th century to really define a trend. But as Yannick said, he was always desirable. Absolutely. And actually, I have a question for you, Mitchell. You are Decorative Arts editor for AD, of course, Architectural Digest. have you featured many times interiors with Boulle furniture?
Yes, actually, from the 1970s and the 80s, they were not infrequently seen in the pages of the magazine. I believe, let's see, the early 2000s, mid 2000s. I know that we've seen Boulle pieces in an interior a few years ago by Michael Smith in New York, and also a couple of Boulle pieces in the Paris flat of Sylvain Lévy-Olban, 2017, I believe. So Boulle may not be a prominent feature in the pages, but it is a not infrequent one.
Good. And I hope that the sale of these three major pieces will inspire interior designers, so that we may see them featured one day in your magazine.
Thank you. And I think we have a third question, and you're not allowed to say both. So you have to fall down on one side or the other. Which predominates in a piece by Boulle? The technological aspect or the aesthetic aspect?
Aesthetic.
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 Yeah.
Of course. The technology aesthetic.
I think we've settled it. We've settled Boulle now.
You have 4 yes. You have 4 yes.
I wish I could say technique, but no, it's aesthetic.
Another question is, what are your thoughts on Pietro Piffetti, as Alvaro González Palacios said was as great as Boulle?
Well, I have to say, being sorry if I lead the answers on this one. I think Alvaro González Palacios, who is a great friend, of course, I think that he's totally right. Piffetti is also another genius. They are totally different because Piffetti has worked on a lot the ivory and the engraved ivory. But I have to say that between the two, even if I'm Italian, I have to say, if I have to use the word genius, I would use the word genius for Boulle. And if I am allowed, the second genius is Piffetti, but number one is Boulle. When I joined Sotheby's, like many other experts, I suppose, or I said, oh my God, Boulle is so rich, he's so heavy. And nowadays I understand how great he was and how great he is. So if I have to use the word genius, it's for Boulle.
Has anyone else an opinion about Piffetti?
Well, I'm French. I don't think I'm allowed to answer that question. But of course, we are better.
I think that I love Piffetti. I think he's great. I think he sits within the formal language of the 18th century without inventing it. He talks it. It's as he sort of twists it, but he doesn't invent it.
Very true.
So he's not creating a new shape.
No, he is creating unbelievable shapes out of the older shapes that were given to him. So he blows it up into one direction, he gives it a curve. But you also see that in Dresden.
Mm-hmm.
That in with Spindler furniture. So it's not that. It's not Boulle.
I mean, I think one of the most interesting photographs in the catalog, and I do hope everyone looks very closely at the catalog, in one of the Boulle lots, is that magnificent gallery d'Apollon, where you really see how important Boulle was, that both sides of this great gallery, like the Galerie des Glaces at Versailles, it looks like 20 pieces of Boulle marching down the gallery, just commode after commode after commode.
Yeah, and then you see, well, that interior has sadly disappeared because St. Cloud has been destroyed. But as Yannick may confirm, in order to make that gallery, many pieces of Boulle had to be adapted because Boulle, I mean, I would like to say that Boulle is green because it's always being used and abused and transformed.
Right.
So, Yannick.
Well, I think you're right in saying Boulle is green, and I'm not going to have that kind of discussion here. But when something is well designed and something is of good quality, it survives. It survives the test of time, and it will be reused. And that's what we see today. We have great objects that are 300 years old because they were valued not for their aesthetic and, of course, for their monetary value. But they were constantly reused and constantly modified in order to fit the new test. But they represent a golden age of the best of what you could get in France at the time. So yeah, the Galerie d'Apollon is one very good example. But to me, possibly the one I miss the most is the Ménagerie Royale, the little zoo that was built for the Duchesse de Bourgogne. And that was this tiny little palace filled with table and console table by Boulle of totally new design. And with the pressure of Louis XIV asking him to always renew, reinvent, there was always something new coming out of his workshop. And I think that's, for me, the Ménagerie Royale is this palace that I miss the most.
Now, did Boulle sign or stamp his furniture?
Unfortunately, not. That wasn't mandatory at the time. It became an obligation later in French cabinet making history. But at the time of Boulle, nothing was signed. So if you think about most of the objects by Boulle are actually attributed to him. And in the language, even in the language of the 18th century catalogue, you have to be quite careful in reading that, because what is really by Boulle the father, or Boulle the son, or by a follower of Boulle, and only a very few or a handful of objects in the world are clearly attributed to Boulle, because they can be traced back from almost the day they were delivered. So Boulle are not stamped, and Boulle are only attributed. And that's what makes it so exciting to study them, because you always discover something new, something that's been modified, or something that is part of a great object that has disappeared. So unfortunately, it's not stamped.
And I felt it was important to follow on, Yannick, what you just said, that there was that quasi-Boulle revival in the 19th century among craftsmen attempting to bring a new Boulle, or at least a Boulle restoration. And I wonder if you could sort of address that, because I know that for some reason there was a great interest in trying to emulate what he had done.
Yes, it's indeed, there was a big revival in the 19th century, but don't forget that there was already a revival in the late 18th century. In the neoclassical time of Louis XVI, there was already a first revival. But the 19th century, obviously, with many new money made in the Industrial Revolution, the need for more objects was obviously there. But you see, I mean, I'm a great lover of 19th century and Belle Epoque and all of this great design, and we see as well. But they've never really managed to catch the strength of Boulle. The Trianon commode, the chest of drawers that I was showing earlier, was copied for the 4th Marquis of Hertford, which is now the World's collection. But you can almost see it. You just walk past it, and there is this kind of clinical manufacturing side of it, which Boulle doesn't have. Boulle it's organic. You immediately feel that kind of organic side of his legs that then anyone copying is not able to reproduce. So yes, the 19th century revival is great, but it's clinical. It's not imaginative.
Now, another question from the audience is how many documented Boulle, I suppose now we're talking attributed Boulle, are there in museums or public collections around the world? Because he obviously made a lot. I mean, that was a very busy studio.
Who wants to answer that? Well, yeah, it was a very large workshop producing a lot of objects. The two possibly the only two really documented objects are the Trianon commodes delivered for the king in 1708. They are the one that can be traced non-stop back to the delivery. But of course, on top of that, you have to add many pieces at the Louvre, many pieces at the Wallace collection, the Met as well. They are a large number. But for example, the Zilkha desk is related to a desk that was delivered to the Prince de Condé, and so therefore you can kind of Boulle is always about that. You start with a very well documented object and then move from another one to another one. And the Zilkha desk is similar to the desk that is now at the Louvre, and it's the one that was saved from the fire of Boulle in 1720. In 1720, there was a terrible fire, and the desk was saved from the flame, and that's the one for the Prince de Condé, which is almost identical to the Zilkha desk. So
Which I think leads us to our moment of save the Boulle, let the rest burn.
Well, I think he tried to, believe me, he tried to save all of his collection of drawing. He had massive collection of Rembrandt and massive collection of drawing, and a lot of them ended up in flame. But yeah, the furniture were saved, so we're very pleased with that. But some arts will not.
I believe our last question is, a viewer would like to know if Boulle pieces are making their way back to France. Is there a growing interest among collectors, or is it always a constant in France, the interest in Boulle?
I think that the interest for Boulle is really worldwide, I would say. I'm not saying maybe because of temperature reasons, maybe our Asian clients maybe are a bit more reluctant to buy Boulle, probably because the marketry is fragile. But there are Asian who have houses in France or in England or in New York, and they buy. One cannot say that Boulle pieces are coming back to France, and quite rightly, they should be spread all over the world in a way. And I wouldn't say that there is a clear tendency.
Okay.
As far as I know. Well, I think that that's all the questions we have we have time for, I would say, because it's nearly, we have reached really the hour. Many thanks to all of you, our brilliant speakers, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. Before we go, I would like still to reminder that the collection of Ezra and Cecile Zilkha will be sold in New York on the 20th of November at 10 a.m. New York time. Additional highlights will feature in magnificent jewels on the 9th of December, as I already said at the beginning, and also in the American art sale on the 11th of December. Please visit sotheby's.com/Zilkha to learn more about the amazing works. And as well, if you want to know more about the contents of the sales, and of course, do not forget to register if you wish to bid. If you are in New York, remember our preview exhibition is open by appointment only through 19th of November at 5 p.m. And we look forward to see you in the galleries. Again, a very warm thank you to our speakers and to our audience. Thank you very much. Goodbye.